I'm here to introduce Karen and Paul. So my name's Maureen Marshall and I'm Myseum's programming chair. I'm very excited to join you this very snowy evening for our latest MyseumConnects event. But before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of the First Nations and the Métis people. I would also like to thank Lord Cultural Resources and their team for co-presenting MyseumConnects with us tonight. And I'd also like to thank Paul Roth of the Ryerson Image Centre for lending his expertise this evening. And finally, I would like to thank Dark Horse Bar and Urban Space Property Group for hosting us this evening and providing all this wonderful food that we've been munching on. If you're unfamiliar with the Myseum of Toronto, it's a new way to experience Toronto's natural spaces, cultures, history, archaeology, and architecture. It's a museum without walls, except tonight, and both literally and figuratively. It's an invitation to Torontonians to co-create their experiences of the city. Instead of visiting one building to look at things, we're inviting you to engage with the Myseum any way that you would like in many places, large and small, across the city. And then to hear about our latest updates, because we do want you to stay connected with us, and to share your experiences and your ideas and make Myseum an even better place, because we need your input to do that. Please stay in touch with us on social media using the hashtag MyseumTO, and please visit our website at www.myseumoftoronto.com. Now I would like to introduce Karen Carter. She's our Executive Director of Myseum of Toronto, and Paul Roth, Director of the Ryerson Image Centre. Paul Roth has been at Ryerson Image Centre in Toronto since the autumn of 2013, and before taking up his post there, he was Senior Curator and Director of Photography and Media Arts at the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and he also served as Executive Director of the Richard Avedon Foundation in New York. I will now pass things over to Karen and Paul to reflect upon ways for emerging professionals and volunteers to effectively break into the sector locally, nationally, and internationally. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. It's like a hidden arm that just took the microphone away from me. Can you hear me? And I apologize because we had this dream of being higher that died because of bad backs. So we were going to sit a little higher. And so if you can't see, hopefully you can do that like sneak between someone's head kind of thing. If you need to move the chair around, move away. We are really lucky to have the opportunity as Myseum to be able to have folks like Paul Roth and others who have been on this interesting co-creation exercise with us. I'm just turning off this phone so it doesn't buzz. We are also lucky in having this space because, as Maureen mentioned, we are a museum without walls, so we're very dependent on partnerships and on short-term spaces like this. This Myseum Gallery is a pop-up. It's a way for us to animate some of the projects that have happened out in the community. So this exhibition was a part of our Intersections Festival in March of 2016 with Scarborough Arts. So later on when you get a chance, please take some time to check it out or to come back. This is a great building, as you know. There's all kinds of interesting things happening here at all times. And in partnering with Dark Horse to do this event here tonight, the two stores, Spacing and the other one's escaped my name. What is it called? Spike. There's probably someone from Spike here saying, how can you forget our name, Karen? Are open, so feel free to give them a little business, because that all works with this partnership. I also wanted to quickly mention that the food is from Ricarda's, the restaurant across the street that recently opened. Fantastical. It's my new favorite place. So please feel free to give them some love so that they're happy that they gave us almost free food tonight. And please eat it all, because there's a lot of food there and I don't want to have to take it home. So with that said, Paul Roth, how are you?
I'm good. How about you?
Okay. We're going to do this really informally. I'm going to ask him a couple of questions. One of my staff is looking at me viciously like, you're already wasting your time. So I don't know why you're still hobbling on about other things that don't matter. Get to the questions, because you're going to cut me off. in 20 minutes, and then you will get a chance to talk to Paul or myself or anyone else in the room and do a bit of networking and some more eating and drinking before you venture back out into the snowy night.
Oh, is there going to be a Q&A too?
There might be a Q&A.
There might be. Okay.
Are you ready for the Q&A?
Totally.
There will be a Q&A. Okay. A brief one though. But we don't want this to be like formally asking a question. We prefer, as those of you who've been here before, some of you are nodding, you're like, yeah, we know, Karen, we know. We get to just walk up to Paul and talk to him. This is not one of those things where it's oh, Paul, the director of. It's very human. So please, if you have an interest in, especially photo-based work, this is as much access as you're ever going to get. I think a couple of people emailed me and said, I want to meet him. Can you introduce me? You can introduce yourself. So this does not have to be that formal. It is quite informal. You okay with that? Are you going to be nice to people who walk up to you?
Okay, for you. For you.
We only allow the nice directors, and we don't allow the intimidating ones in. Tell us, Paul, about your career path. One of the cool things that has always happened with these sessions, you get to hear the backstory on how does one become the director of the Ryerson Image Centre? How did you get here? Why did you leave America to come to Canada? That's loaded. It's loaded.
No, that's the best part of the question. First of all, I want to thank Karen and Myseum for having me. I feel really fortunate to live in a city with such amazing and diverse cultural offerings, but I have to say Myseum is in many ways for me one of the most exciting, if not the most exciting, because it is a new model institution. It's remodeling how we think about museums, what they do, where they are, if they are anywhere in real space. And so for me, it's really powerful to watch Myseum grow. So how did I start? I started really young, younger than most people I know. I was really interested in photography when I was in high school. And I was then, and I still am, really obsessive, kind of monomaniacal. Photography became my whole world when I was about 15 years old. And I wanted to be a photographer. And of course, I didn't know what that meant. So I tried all different kinds of photography, and I got more and more interested in art photography. And I was really lucky. I was growing up in a city called Tucson in Arizona, southern Arizona, where one of the very few major photo museums in the United States is. And it's really world class. It's where many of the most important artists' archives from the photo world reside. Ansel Adams, Edward Weston, Harry Callahan, I could go on and on and on. And they were all there, and when I was in high school, I started going there to learn. And it was a very small institution at the time, and it was the kind of place that you could transition from being an audience member to working there. I deliberately went to the University of Arizona so I could work there. And I walked in one day and asked if I could work there. and the registrar was sent out to handle me. And he, with great bemusement and great gentleness, one of the loveliest people I've ever known in this world, in the museum world, a man named Lawrence Fong, who I think is still working in museums in Oregon, took a chance on me. He let me unframe an exhibition that had just come back from traveling, from being on the road. I didn't know how to unframe an exhibition. He showed me. It was easier back then. It was those little spring clips that you popped out with a flathead screwdriver. And it was an Ansel Adams show. And it was very heady. It was really, really overwhelming. And it happened right then, by the way. I left that part out. He literally said, do you want to do this? And so I walked into the back with him, and he showed me how to do it, and he left me to it. And 3 hours later, he came back. And the next day, I came back to finish it. And at the end of that day, he asked me if I wanted to work there. And I got paid $3.90 an hour, which went up over the years to $4.10 an hour. And over the 5 years that I was there, I did a little bit of everything. And my life changed. I did go to school, nominally, but really I was there, and that was what I wanted to do. And I was able to organize a significant part of the Edward Weston archive, the Gary Winogrand Archive, which came in while I was there. I helped move the museum from one building to another when a new building was built. And those kinds of opportunities are just overwhelming. And I also met a number of really important artists over the years who were kindly enough to let me tag along behind them and ask them questions. So my thing started when I was 18. And by the time I hit about 22, 23, I graduated after 5 years. It took me a long time because I spent more time at work than I did in class. And then I applied for a job at the National Gallery of Art in Washington to organize the archive of the photographer Robert Frank. For those of you who know photography, that's like dying and going to heaven. He's, by consensus, the most important American photographer of the 20th century. And I worked on that and that only for 4.5 years. Which was extraordinary, and I was able to spend a lot of time with him and interface with scholars around the world and work on a major show and book. And from there, it really has just been, trying to identify what jobs could make me feel as compelled as those two early extraordinary experiences made me feel. I was so lucky early on, and I never really wanted that to go away. I followed one of my two bosses from the Robert Frank Archive, a curator named Philip Brookman. After I was finished organizing the Frank Archive, he brought me over to the Corcoran Gallery of Art. And I worked there in 2 different stints for about 16 years, going from assistant curator to, actually that's not true, from curatorial assistant to assistant curator to associate curator to curator of photography and media arts. And then I left after about 14 years to head up the Richard Avedon Foundation, which is an artist foundation in New York City dedicated to the portrait photographer and fashion photographer Richard Avedon. And I was there for 2 years. And that was less interesting to me. It was interesting initially, and it got less interesting as I went because it was mostly about marketing and selling his work. And it was exciting at first because I didn't know much about that world. But after a while, it was the same thing over and over. I think that I wasn't built to understand the dimensions and nuances of sales. I'm too much of an archivist and a curator at heart, and so I couldn't really stay there. And so I went back to the Corcoran. I did that for a really peculiar reason, and that is that the Corcoran was in very serious financial difficulty. My boss, this guy who brought me there, was now the chief curator, and he wanted me to come back to help him kind of quietly to dismantle the institution in a humane and in a humane way, so that the staff and the collection would not be damaged unduly by it. We couldn't tell anybody this. I came back ostensibly to be the senior curator of photography and media arts, my old job basically with a slightly better title. And I did do that, but what I was primarily doing was I was in very painful meetings about unwinding the institution and finding a proper home for the collection. At the time that I did that, before I even went back there, I already knew that a job would be opening up in Toronto that I wanted badly. I knew that because my predecessor at the RIC, at the Ryerson Image Centre, Doina Popescu, had told me that she would be retiring in about 2.5 years. If anybody here knows Doina, that shouldn't surprise you. Doina plans everything. And so she knew that, she told me that, and I was so excited by the idea of the RIC, a new photo center at the dawn of the 21st century, that I thought, I have to do that. I had also fallen in love with Toronto, a city I'd been to many, many times over the years, and a city I'd been to a lot over the last several years because I did an exhibition with Ed Bertinsky for the Corcoran. So I had friends here, and I loved the city. So I had a kind of a ticking alarm clock on that job. And then when the job at Ryerson opened up, I applied for it. I got it, which was very exciting for me, and I moved here. And about a year after that, my wife moved as well, because my wife is an art conservator, and she wanted to finish things up at her job at the Library of Congress. She's now in private practice here. I've been here 3.5 years. It's my second job as a director. First job as a museum director. I still consider myself always to be learning. So it's really nice to see a room of people who are trying to figure out what your direction is as well. I will tell you, mine's a little atypical in some ways. I've been incredibly lucky. I think luck plays a part in everybody's career arc, but for me it feels like one nirvana after another. And especially now, I don't think I've ever been happier at a job, at a place. The staff that I have, the shows that we're able to work on, the people that I'm able to partner with and team.
We've paid him so well to be nice to us.
She's very modest, as you know. I'm just kidding. You're not modest at all.
Oh, really? Where's the love? Where is the love?
I just gave you the love, and you made fun of me. So forget it.
Two quick things. There's some people standing. There's 2 seats at the front here, and I think there's one. If anybody else can point out a seat, you might as well be comfortable if you can.
Hold up. I do want to make clear, because she brought this Canada question up. I want to be very clear. I did not move to Canada because of Donald Trump. I've been here 3.5 years, and I came here because I wanted to be part of the cultural community. I am very fortunate to be here now, but I was fortunate before too. So.
Well, no, I know you fell in love with the city long before the Trump thing. It was an interesting timing, though, don't you feel like? You were watching this train move, and it was like, what's happening?
Yeah.
We won't go there. We're not even. No. I didn't even want the T word mentioned because I feel like we just. That's what I call it now, the T word, because it messes up your whole psyche and your vibe for the day. So I don't. It goes unnamed. Talk to us a bit about being at Ryerson, because your story is, I think, unique. It somewhat reminds me of mine in that you just kind of inserted yourself in and volunteered, and then it took shape from there, and people were kind and allowed you the opportunity to get in. So maybe talk about what it means, given that being in this academic institution, and for what is, if we went through this room, you were probably all uber overeducated with degrees up the wazoo, and young people coming out into the sector now with all of these qualifications, and that balance between being qualified and having the network, and how do you even get in the door and get the chance to start?
Yeah.
I mean, are you able to create those spaces at Ryerson, or?
Yeah, I'm kind of determined to. It's very different now from when I started, and I sometimes feel like I came at the end of a generation as opposed to being part of a younger generation. And in photography terms, what that means is that I started working at a photo institution at a moment when an earlier generation of people was still well established. These are the people that essentially created the photography marketplace for fine art photography sales, the photography institutional and intellectual community. A whole generation of people that came up in the 60s were establishing institutions from the 60s through the 80s, the early 80s. Those were the people who were my mentors, and they weren't that much older than me when I started. And those people were, they were hippies to some extent. And so they were willing to give opportunities if they felt that someone was interested, curious, and capable. I didn't have to go to school to start doing what I was doing. I mean, I had to work at I had to go to the University of Arizona to have a student job at the Center for Creative Photography. But other than that, I never got a graduate degree. I say that quite openly. It makes some people kind of have a sharp intake of breath because it's not supposed to be acceptable. And these days it kind of isn't. It's not possible anymore. And I have no issues with that whatsoever. But when I started, I was so determined to work at a photo museum from the time I was 18 that I didn't really ever look back. There were moments when I could have gone back to grad school and didn't because I was too happy and felt too satisfied with the jobs that I had. But now I work in a different context, and a lot of young people come to Ryerson and work for us there. My staff is comprised primarily of graduates of our own master's program in photo preservation and collections management, now called the Film and Photo Preservation and Collections Management Program. I think something like 80% of my staff comes from there. The younger people who work there are usually, though not universally, from that program in the moment that they're working for us. and they also use our facilities. And one of the things that's been a big challenge for me is thinking about how to create opportunities for young people. I think that it has to take place within the academic context and environment, because that's who we are. It doesn't make sense to do it otherwise, that we would have a program like this and ever give a position to someone like me who didn't go to a program like that, I think is a bit unimaginable right now. But having said that, there are young people who are just barely learning the ropes, who come to us and are able to get a practical education by working firsthand with Photographers Archives, with the Black Star Collection, which is our big collection of photojournalism. And they're able to learn in real terms how you organize a collection, make an archive accessible, and how collections are used to source exhibitions, publications, and other learning opportunities for people. And for me, that's one of the most important things we do. It's like audience of one person at a time, that person, but it's phenomenal. And we do it, several people per year, year after year now. We're in our 5th year. We're still young, but that's, for me, a very, very important part of our growth. For me, the biggest challenge now is how to increase diversity within our ranks, because that's something that I've found very frustrating coming here. It's not new to me. It's not unique to Canada, obviously, but it's one of the more frustrating things about working in the art world, is that I'm looking over and over and over at CVs that are from people who have relatively defined monolithic experience, academic levels, people who are generally of Anglo background, primarily women, to be honest with you. And I feel like we're not doing enough to create opportunities for people of color or for people from Indigenous backgrounds in this community. So that's sort of the next frontier for us and what I'm working on now.
Talk to us a bit about the landscape. I mean, you've alluded to it just in your own career trajectory, but is there advice that you can give, especially outside of RIC, for people that are in this bigger, wider worlds? I know those institutions that are showing photography, or that may be the places one could go, but I mean, the hollowed halls of places like Metivier, you may not want to start there, but how would you get there if you wanted to be on the private gallery side? Because there's that whole other layer of this conversation about working in the sector and not necessarily limiting yourself to just the traditional museum institutions, but working in the community centers and in those other places and working your way up from there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very biased toward work experience as a means of getting ahead, and that's not going to be any surprise based on the story that I just told. But I think that it's really critical now. I could very easily, and I'll go ahead and say right now that you should go to school and get a master's degree and a graduate degree of some kind, PhD, if that's terminal in the area you're interested in, whether, if that's art history. But
I was waiting for the but.
The but is it's not enough anymore. There's so many people who are doing that the market for people with graduate degrees is saturated by people with graduate degrees. So how do you separate yourself within that? And how do you really learn how a museum works, how a gallery works, how an artist studio works? I would argue that that you can learn, you do learn from an education in museum studies or collections management. A little bit less so with art history, which can be taken in multiple directions. You can be an academic art historian or a curator or any number of other things from that direction. But what I think does prepare you for your career is early, frequent experience in the places that you want to be, or the places that model where you want to be in the future. I think it's critical. I know of so many examples. I couldn't go into that many of them. We would be here forever. But I met one person here who I found out started volunteering at a local gallery, not Metivier, but another one, when she was 15 years old. And that is fantastic. She was editing press releases at 15. And so my hat is perpetually off to her. I see her, she teaches at Ryerson now, so I see her in the hallway, and I always admire that about her. I know somebody whose later career who left Canada, went to Wichita, Kansas, and got a job in a museum there because, I assume, because she couldn't get jobs here, the jobs that she wanted here. And that impresses me. That's powerful to me, to see someone who will relocate, dislocate. It's not possible for everybody to do that. It's incredibly difficult for most people to do that. But if you do it, it shows commitment and it demonstrates your willingness to do what it takes in order to get where you want to go. I will tell you, I don't believe much, nor do I have much patience for the idea of high and low institutions. I have met people that will deliberately turn down positions because they think that something is beneath them. There are, of course, places and situations where that is probably smart, but it's very, very hard for me to hear that because I've known many people who I hold in very high esteem who sat at the front of galleries, student galleries, community spaces when they couldn't get another job, and they did that because they couldn't get that job. And those are the people in my experience who ended up where they wanted to be, doing what they loved. So I believe in that powerfully. I think that you should do whatever it takes to get that kind of experience hands-on.
I'm getting the evil eye from Jess, which means that we're about to wrap up this formal part of the talk. Thank you so much for that. I think if you can give our Paul a hand.